I can't tell if anybody. I'm going to just start talking. Someone should ask questions or just jump in, and we'll see how it goes. But I just don't really know. Let's see what's to say. So, in May of this year, I did something unexpected and crazy. I swapped this a very expensive Apple Magic Keyboard, so-called Magic Keyboard, which I've been using for several years with my iPad Pro 12.9 inch, uh, for this beast, this big clunky beast. Something was I didn't expect, even in April, that I would have done. What had happened was that it'd been a while since I'd bought any gadgets, to be honest, and I was on TikTok, and as you do, I was flipping through videos, and someone did a TikTok on mechanical keyboards. Now, at the time, I thought that was a bit esoteric, a bit from that field, but I thought, hey, it's been a while since I've bought anything interesting for my iPad, and I like buying gadgets. I'm a geek after all. So I had a look at Medium to search for some articles and discovered there were other people out there, and actually mechanical keyboards were a bit of a thing. So I took advantage of Amazon's returns policy and bought a mechanical keyboard, a Keychron K3, as it happens. Now, it's a good job that Amazon has a good returns policy, because the Keychron K3 is quite a narrow keyboard and isn't much wider than, say, a standard Apple Magic Keyboard. And it was just too cramped. I kept hitting keys all over the place, which is why I returned it and got the K8, this beast. And I absolutely loved it. Great feedback, great clickety clack noise coming from it. You know, when you've typed something, the keys are nicely laid out. It's got a separate arrow, directional arrows. It's got special keys. There's a special key for taking screenshots and stuff like that. And it's got function keys. And most of all, it's got an easy to hit escape key. All things which my expensive Magic Keyboard, which cost pretty much 3 times what this mechanical keyboard cost, didn't have. And much more than that, this just felt like holding a piece of plastic, really. Whereas this is nice and chunky. It was something that you could really felt as if you had something. I thought that's amazing. How come I didn't know about mechanical keyboards? How come this was been a mystery only revealed this year to me? And then I realized that I did know about mechanical keyboards. Actually, as I typed on the keyboard, memories started coming back of when I first began working as a professional in the industry. I started off life as a C++ programmer for a telco, and I used to use one of the original IBM PCs. It was an IBM PC-80, actually. And I also had access to one of the original Apple Macintosh 512Ks. And they had proper keyboards, and they had a nice feedback, and you felt you were typing on something. And as I typed on my Keychron, pleasant memories came back. Those were the days. And back then, a mechanical keyboard was actually one of the things that distinguished a professional's keyboard, a business keyboard, from the cheap ones you got at home. The sort of keyboards that were on the original Atari 400, if anybody remembers that or have heard of that, or if you're from the UK, the ZX Spectrum. And even actually, if you weren't in the business and you're just into gaming, you still wanted to have something sturdy like this, because as things got excited with Space Invaders, or Elite as it was back then, and you're banging away on the keys on your keyboard, you wanted to be able to take the punishment. They were sturdy beasts. But somewhere along the line, it became the norm to have keyboards which were much more like this, thin. Barely know that you've actually typed on them. And I wondered, how how did that transition happen? How did we move from a world where having a mechanical keyboard was seen as something that set you apart to a world where actually a mechanical keyboard was something that made you a bit from left field, a bit of a nerd's nerd. Um, uh, so I have a couple of theories. Like I think the basic what happened on the ground level was that as people moved from using their computers, not just on their desk but on the move, the keyboards had to go with the computers on the move, obviously. Although there were initial experimentations with using a full-size keyboard with your portable, or I should probably say luggable computer, because the only example I can think of that has a full-size keyboard was an Osborne One. They were heavy, they were cumbersome. So at some point, manufacturers decided it would be better to upgrade the awful keyboards on the ZX Spectrum and the Atari 400 to the point where they were actually fit for purpose. They weren't perfect. They weren't as good as as a mechanical one would be, but they would be good enough. And then they got to that stage, and suddenly laptops had those types of keyboards. And then someone said, "Well, actually, we need to minimize our costs because we need to maximize our products because that's capitalism for you. And wouldn't it be good if we could just use the same mechanism everywhere?" And so it is that even whether you buy a MacBook Pro like the one I'm sitting in front of at the moment, or you buy an iMac, you get a keyboard where the underlying mechanism is like this, and everybody's okay with it. And was that because people decided at some point actually they prefer that to a full-size, full travel keyboard with all the function keys and arrow keys and a key number pad? No, it was because it was convenient. It was a way of manufacturing computers more cheaply, and corporate products profits went up. How did they manage that trick? Well, through marketing. And as I was sat in front of my iPad Pro 12.9 and clickety clacking on my new keyboard, I got to think about it, and I realized that marketing isn't a passive activity, which is no surprise. It's not just about understanding where you can sell your products and crafting your products to sell into a particular market segment or sector. It became more about actually influencing and persuading, and actually even further than that, I think it actually goes as far as to actually take you to the point where you want to change people's perceptions, actually put into people's minds that they have certain needs or can fulfill the needs in a way that suits the corporate more than it suits the individual. But how does that happen? Well, I think it comes from, at some point, corporations decided that they need to stop focusing on products and started to focus more on the people who bought the products. That's one thing. So if you look at, say, car adverts for the sake of argument, you find out very, very little about what cars actually do, and more about the type of people who buy those cars and where you'd like to think they actually go, which generally is very exotic locations with very empty roads. So at the end of it, you'll be none the wiser about the car, but you will be knowing that it's the beautiful people, the exciting people who will be driving that car. And if you want to be one of them, you should buy that car too. The other powerful tool that corporate use is that they try to persuade you and try to create an idea that you're not just buying a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone or a computer. You're buying into a way of life and signaling to the world that you have a set of values. And again, you see that in the adverts. The people who buy, say, Apple's products for the sake of argument, are people who care about the environment, about their health, who are very, very creative people, very dynamic, exciting people. Who knows what they will come up with next? Tim Cook in his many pronouncements says, I'm excited to find out what you will do next with these new products. And so it becomes almost like an emotional bond forms between the corporate and the people buying those products. In fact, it almost a group thing starts to apply where everybody sort of, I think in fluid dynamics they call it the laminar flow, everybody's pointing the same way. And nothing sort of shows us quite so much as what's happening next month is the big iPhone launch. What that iPhone launch is a glorified advert for their new product. But through clever marketing, they change the perception so that it's actually an event. It is a way of continuing the mission of Apple to further innovate and change the world. That's something else. The new marketing thinking theory goes is that you're not buying a product, you're helping to change the world, and that the corporation isn't just building a product, they're selling you something that is world changing, something that was definitely started off by Steve Jobs. And as the group think develops, and as you buy into, you're almost like in a religious movement, you increasingly are focused on what the company wants, and you tend to forget what's going on with your own requirements, what you actually need to make your life better. And we don't really help ourselves because actually ahead of those sales events, there's always lots of rumors and leaks about what's going to appear on them. Until we get sucked in, and then there's the scarcity marketing strategy. Well, this will be available within a week. There's always a big queue. It used to be a physical queue in the real world outside Apple shops, all dragging you into this group thing, and you don't. And what's launched is what's good for a general marketplace and for the corporate, but is it really good for you as an individual consumer? Is that what's making your life happier and more productive? I do get a lot of joy out of that, but I get a lot less joy out of that, especially since I paid 3 times the price for what is a very flat keyboard, as you can see. So it's all part of corporations selling more and more products. That's part of how capitalism works. That's how they pay for the innovations, and the innovations comes through. And I think it's called inbuilt redundancy for the product. That's not exactly the word, but it's something like that. And if we didn't do it, if we didn't get dragged in, the world wouldn't progress quite so much, which is sort of the paradox of capitalism. To get long-term innovation, you have to get people to keep buying things that they don't necessarily want. That drift between what we actually need and the real benefits we get from a new product gets worse as a product gets older, as it gets to the end of its product life cycle. The innovations that you got from buying the second model of the iPhone versus the 14th is much greater. So the first iPhones didn't have cut and paste. They didn't have a camera. They used 2G networking. When the next version came out, it did have a camera. It had 3G networking. It was a massive step forward, and there was real value to consumers to actually buy it. But towards the end of the life cycle, up in the 14, now it's incremental improvements. And actually, you could probably go for 3 or 4 versions of a product. But that isn't really in the corporate interest for you to do that. They much prefer you to get to the next phone, and they really boost the new features of their devices. And of course, if it's promoting this sort of new, almost religious view of products, that's great for them, but it's not necessarily good for you. And as I discovered, I'd forgotten what was really good for me, and I'd known about it for literally decades, but somehow corporate marketing had taken that away from me. So I am going to think a lot harder about what I buy now, even if it's from Apple, or perhaps even if it's especially from Apple. I'm still going to watch the launch events. I'm still going to get excited about some of the innovations. And I'll still go through the Apple Store and look at all the latest technology. And I guess when things like the Vision Pro comes along, I'll certainly spend more time looking about it and thinking about it than I ought to. But I remind myself that that's good for Apple, but I'm not sure if it's really good for me. And that possibly isn't the best way to boost my productivity and get things done that I hope will be done. So that's what it is. So if anybody has any questions, they should go ahead and ask, and hopefully something will pop up on this. I don't see any thing, so I'll just wait and see if anybody says anything.